The very concept of money itself has always been strange. Though today we picture coins and paper bills as perfectly normal. Imagine traveling back in time and explaining to a medieval banker that a little plastic card held digital numbers that signified how much money you had and allowed you to buy groceries. Seems pretty strange when you explain it that way, especially in a time before modern technology. The very concept of currency was something that developed over time and in interesting ways. Throughout history, money has taken on some truly remarkable forms, which today we might think very strange. What if I told you that people once traded with stones taller than themselves, rare seashells, or even blocks of salt? Today, we're going to get a full accounting of some of the forgotten fortunes of the past. Thanks for spending time with me. Let's check it out. Before we explore the strangest currencies, let's establish what is money. Bartering is one of the oldest systems of trade, used long before money was invented. Instead of paying with coins or bills, people exchanged goods and services directly. For example, a farmer might trade grain for a pot made by a local craftsman, or a shepherd could swap wool for tolls. The value of items wasn't fixed. It depended on what each person needed at the time, which made bartering flexible but also tricky. If two people didn't want what the other had, then no trade could happen. This challenge eventually led to the creation of currency, which made exchanges easier and more consistent. At its core, currency is anything that people agree has value. It doesn't have to be shiny coins or printed paper. If a community agrees that something can be exchanged for goods and services, then it becomes the currency for that community. In the beginning, the money used by people tended to be things that community saw as valuable in itself. That's why early societies often used everyday items like food, tools, or natural resources as money. But sometimes these choices were objects that we would consider very strange today. Let's start with a currency that is one of the most unique. It comes from the island of Yap in Micronesia. Their money was called rye stones. These were not small pebbles that you carry around in your pocket like coins. They were massive circular stones with a hole in the center. Some were as small as a plate, while others were more like boulders than stones, being over 12 feet tall and weighing several tons. These stones were so heavy that they almost never moved. Ownership simply changed hands when deals were made, and everyone in the village just kept track of who owned which stone. Imagine buying groceries today by saying, "Yeah, you see that massive boulder over there? That's mine. Now it's yours. Thanks for the bread." In the modern world, salt is easy to come by. In fact, many of us get too much of it. However, that wasn't always the case, and people do need a certain amount of salt to survive. Because of this, salt wasn't always just a seasoning. For centuries, it was one of the world's most valuable currencies. In ancient Rome, soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. That is actually where we get the word salary from. In parts of Africa, salt was pressed into solid bars called amole and used in trade. In addition to needing a certain amount of salt to live, salt was also valuable because it was essential for preserving food. Without refrigeration, salt was the difference between feast and famine. Remember when I mentioned shells? Cowrie shells might look like simple beach treasures, but they were once the most widely used currencies in the world. From Africa to Asia, cowries were traded for goods and services. They made great money. They were durable, easy to carry, and difficult to counterfeit. Plus, they were pretty, small, shiny, and uniform in shape. In some places, they were still used as money as recently as the 20th century. What other natural resources did people use as money? In the Americas, furs were among the most valuable traded items, especially during the fur trade era when European settlers and indigenous peoples exchanged animal pelts for tools, weapons, and other goods. Beaver pelts in particular were prized for making felt hats, which became a fashion staple in Europe. But beavers weren't the only animals caught up in this trade. Otters were too. Sea otter pelts were considered some of the finest and softest fur in the world, so valuable that they were sometimes called soft gold. This made otters a major part of international trade networks stretching from North America to Russia and China. If you want to learn more about these fascinating animals beyond their role in historical currency, make sure to check out my full video all about otters. It's understandable that fur would have some value, but what about feathers? In the Solomon Islands, rare red feathers from a small species of parrot were carefully collected and treasured as a form of currency. These feathers weren't simply traded on their own. They were painstakingly woven into belts, ornaments, and elaborate decorations that represented both wealth and social status. Because the feathers were difficult to obtain and took great effort to craft into usable items that were considered money, they carried immense cultural and symbolic value. Feather money was often exchanged during important ceremonies such as marriages, alliances, and peace agreements, showing that currency wasn't just about trade, it was about maintaining relationships and traditions within the community. But land animals weren't the only ones that were traded. Even whale teeth was once used as currency. Known in Fiji as tabua, whale teeth were highly valued and used as a form of currency, as well as a powerful symbol of status and respect. These polished, ivory-colored teeth weren't exchanged in everyday trade like coins or shells, but instead played an important role in major societal and cultural events. A tabua might be given to seal an important agreement, pay a bride price in marriage negotiations, or show deep apology and reconciliation during conflict. Because whales were rare and their teeth difficult to obtain, tabua carried immense prestige and were passed down through generations as treasured heirlooms. In this way, they functioned as both currency and cultural treasures, holding value far beyond simple economics. Today we say money doesn't grow on trees, but that wasn't always the case. There was a time when you could literally grow your own currency in the form of essential crops, and some of them even grew on trees. The Aztecs valued cocoa beans so highly that they used them not just as food, but as money. A handful of beans could buy a meal, a rabbit, or even pay tribute to rulers. This made chocolate one of the most important parts of their economy. At the same time, cocoa was reserved for luxury drinks enjoyed by nobles, warriors, and priests, linking it to both wealth and power. In fact, chocolate was so precious that it was seen as a gift from the gods. If you'd like to dive deeper into the rich history and cultural impact of chocolate, I happen to have a video all about chocolate. In colonial America, tobacco wasn't just a crop, it was the foundation of the economy. Because it was in such high demand both locally and overseas, especially in Europe, tobacco leaves became so valuable that they were used as a medium of exchange, functioning almost like cash. Farmers paid taxes, merchants collected debts, and everyday goods could be bought with bundles of tobacco. In fact, colonial governments in places like Virginia and Maryland formally recognized tobacco as legal tender during the 1600s and 1700s. Laws allowed debts, taxes, and even fines to be paid in pounds of cured tobacco, with rates set by local assemblies. For many colonists, a well-stocked tobacco barn was essentially the same thing as a bank account, since those leaves could be used directly in trade or to settle official obligations. In China, Mongolia, and parts of Russia, compressed blocks of tea once served as currency. These bricks were lightweight, stackable, and could even be brewed and drunk in times of need. Merchants stamped each brick with official designs, almost like minting coins. Imagine buying groceries today with a chocolate bar you could snack on afterward. That's basically how tea bricks worked. Now here's a strange case that wasn't exactly currency, but for a brief moment in history, it might as well have been. In the Netherlands during the 1630s, tulips became the center of what we now call tulip mania. Rare bulbs, especially those with unique colors and patterns, became so valuable that people traded them as if they were money. This was history's first recorded example of a speculative bubble. A single tulip bulb could be exchanged for land, livestock, or even a house. Some people signed contracts or swapped bulbs for fortunes, treating flowers like gold. But just like bubbles today, the market eventually collapsed. Tulip prices crashed almost overnight, leaving many people ruined. If you want to learn more about tulips, check out my video all about them. When we think of metals that coins are made from, we typically think of gold, silver, and maybe copper. But iron was once a valuable metal as well. In parts of pre-colonial Africa, iron tools like hoes, spades, and spears served as a form of currency because they represented both survival and power. These tools were essential for farming, which was the backbone of most communities, and for protection in times of conflict, making them universally valuable. Large iron implements were often shaped into distinctive designs, with some resembling oversized versions of everyday tools. They were exchanged during important transactions such as paying dowries, settling debts, or marking treaties. Because producing iron required specialized skills and resources, these items carried prestige as well as practical worth. In some regions, entire economies were built around this system, showing how closely tied currency was to the tools that sustained life itself. From weapons to crops, almost anything could become money if people trusted its value. While we still think of gems as treasures today, and we wear them and decorate with them, in many cultures they also functioned as a form of money. Precious stones like emeralds, rubies, and sapphires were prized for their beauty, rarity, and durability, making them a natural choice for trade. In ancient India, gems often circulated in place of coins for large transactions and as tribute to rulers. Along the Silk Road, merchants exchanged uncut gems like gold or silver, carrying them as portable fortunes across vast distances. In medieval Europe, nobles frequently stored wealth in gemstones since they could be hidden, carried easily, and accepted in international trade even where local coins were not. While gems were never as standardized as minted coins, their universal appeal meant that they could serve as a reliable medium of exchange. Over the centuries, societies moved from bartering and unusual currencies to coins made of precious metals. The first known coins appeared around 600 BCE in the ancient kingdom of Lydia in modern-day Turkey, made from a natural mix of gold and silver called electrum. Coins quickly became popular because they were durable, easy to carry, and widely accepted. Later, paper money was introduced. Paper money was first introduced in China during the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century, but it became more widely used under the Song Dynasty around the 11th century. Paper currency was originally backed by gold or silver reserves. In time, even that guarantee disappeared, and paper currency simply held value because people collectively agreed that it did. These changes remind us that money in any form works only because people trust and believe in its worth. So the next time you hand over a dollar bill, imagine trying to pay with a giant stone wheel, a feather, or a bag of cocoa beans. The history of money is filled with creativity and survival, which seems more than a little weird to our modern eyes. But remember that there will come a time when we too become the past. And I wonder what kinds of currency our descendants will come up with. Thanks for joining me on this journey into forgotten fortunes. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's weirdest currencies, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Which one of these strange currencies would you want to use if you lived in the past? And if you want to learn more about valuable objects, check out my video all about emeralds. They are the currency used in the game Minecraft, but they are also valuable rocks in the real world. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to get messy and make lots of mistakes today. Bye!